We want to welcome everybody to our July Tech Talk. We're pretty excited. This is one of the first ones we've ever done with two special guests from two different locations, and it's the first time we've ever done one with a partner. So we've got Akamai, we've got Layer7 down at Gartner Catalyst. I'm Steve, this is Jose, and I just want to welcome in everybody and explain how to ask your questions. I know it usually takes people a couple of minutes to get started, to log in. If you're just getting to your desk, don't forget you can always chat your questions in the window to the left of the video, the picture. Sorry, to the right side. You can tweet your questions with the hashtag Layer7Live. You can also email them if you've got kind of a longer, more complicated question, or if you just can't stick around for the whole talk and wait for your question to be answered. You can email them to techtalk@layer7.com. So our special guest today, we've got our chief architect, Francois Lascelles, and he's down in San Diego at Gartner Catalyst, right at the Layer7 booth. And we've got product line director, Gary Ballabio. Hopefully I'm Ballabio, from Akamai, and you're in San Mateo, I understand. And I'll let you introduce your partner, Brian, I think you said his name was.
Yeah.
So Gary, if you wouldn't mind just sort of introducing yourself and who you are, and then Francois, if you do the same.
Yeah. So Gary Ballabio from Akamai, based in Akamai's San Mateo office. Product line director running Akamai's enterprise style portfolio. Essentially, we provide services to companies that are leveraging the internet for their own productivity needs and business process sort of needs. I have a colleague here, Brian Green, who's a product manager on the and he specifically focuses on guys sort of enablement with our and he's been engaged in a lot of Layer7 sort of Akamai. So it's going to be good to have him join in case there's a super technical question at the meeting.
Great, Francois. This is your third Tech Talk, I think. A couple on SSO, one on OAuth. You were the very first one, and I'm wearing your shirt. This is a Where's Waddle shirt that Francois designed. And I forgot to mention too, Jose's got our API management shirt on. That if you ask a question throughout the stream, and we answer it, we'll send you one of these nifty shirts. So, so just keep your questions coming after after you kind of get the idea of what it is we're talking about. Make sure you chat in your questions, comments, tweet them, hashtag Layer7Live, and we'll get those questions answered the best we can, and you'll get a shirt for free.
Hi guys, Francois, Chief Architect, Layer7. I'm actually live on the floor of our booth at Gartner Catalyst, so I apologize for the background noise here. It's very busy, but it sounds like the connection is working good, so it sounds like this is going to be fun. And yeah, so for those who don't know me, Chief Architect, Layer7, did a lot of work in engineering. Now I'm field facing, so I'm really in touch with a lot of enterprise architects that are rolling out API infrastructure and are faced with some of the challenges that basically from which came the requirements in some situations to integrate Layer7 API management infrastructure with Akamai. So this should be a great topic. Thanks for setting that up.
Great. Just to let you guys know, you guys are going to do a little introduction about the product stuff. We're getting a couple questions already through the chat, so that's great. Thanks, everybody. Stefan, we'll get to your question as soon as Franco and Gary, sort of introduce the whole topic as a whole, and then we'll get to answer your question.
So, well, I mean, I think it would be good for those on the call who are not too familiar with Akamai. I can give just a brief who Akamai is and kind of like how we fit into this API sort of world, and then hopefully from there it can sort of spring up a lot of ideas in people's minds, and then some questions as well. Sound good?
Yes.
Yes. All right.
Oh, sorry.
So these are just some slides I whipped together just to give a brief introduction on who Akamai is. So from a high level, Akamai runs a globally distributed platform. So what we do is we optimize traffic over the internet. So any end users accessing content through the internet, that content can be distributed through the Akamai platform, and advantage to our customers is being able to provide very high quality service to any user globally from a centralized environment. So it's a very efficient way to distribute content over the internet. We have well over 120,000 servers, and our strategy is to place servers into ISPs, downstream ISPs, as well as the core backbone providers. We analyze the internet, we study the internet, and we figure out what are the best locations to deploy our servers based on where end users are, and where most of the internet traffic is coming from. So very strategically placed. It's not just a shotgun approach and throwing them anywhere anybody would accept them, but really studying, focusing on where end users are. So today, just to give you some overview, so we deliver, many different websites, over 150,000. Brian and I, we did a quick study just a couple of weeks ago, and just got some very raw numbers, and we saw that we're delivering over 1,000 APIs on our platform today, and that's just doing a search for any hosting with the word API, in it, API dot in it essentially. So. Quite extensive platform, not only from a standard website, e-commerce websites and types of business applications running through us, but there's even a lot of APIs running through us. I think some of the more interesting statistics. So we deliver anywhere from 15 to 30% of the world's internet traffic today. So clearly, we're a very good data point for health of the internet and the activity happening on the internet. That relates to or translates to about 12 terabits per second of traffic on our platform from a peak daily standpoint, and also about 27 million bits per second from the daily peak.
Wow.
Quite a lot of traffic running through our platform. So that's high-level overview of who we are. More specifically, from an API delivery standpoint, like I said, Akamai fits in here where we optimize that little thing called the internet that's connecting your end users to your API infrastructure. And we do that with this globally distributed platform. And essentially what we're doing is we have technology that allows Akamai to ensure that every end user is pointed to the best server for them at that moment in time. We have a mapping system constantly analyzing the internet and deciphering what Akamai server is best to serve to that IP address. And it's something that is constantly updating, based on internet conditions and constantly changing. Then what we do is we essentially optimize the delivery between our servers, optimize TCP connections. We optimize the route that is actually through the internet, and get to the best available route, the route with the least amount of packet loss, the route with the least amount of link. So through peak periods on the internet, we're able to route around internet congestion points. This is kind of some of the techniques that we apply, when delivering any type of content as well as specifically around APIs. What we do, we provide performance and scalability by leveraging techniques like caching, so being able to cache the results of API requests across our servers, being able to offload some of the authentication and authorization. So I can go into detail in terms about how that works as well. But from a high level, being able to view Akamai as kind of like an extension of that core infrastructure that the business rules live. What we do is we essentially integrate seamlessly with that infrastructure. So all the core is still maintained in the centralized environment, but then there are roles that are extended, which I'll describe in terms of how it works. From an availability standpoint, Akamai provides 100% SLA to our customers for our service platform. And we can do that because of our mapping system, which ensures that every user can connect to an end user, to a server, any moment in time. And then from there, we can detect problems, routing problems on the internet that, say, are preventing access to our environment. And then in real time, fail over to a secondary location. Or be able to route around conditions to reach the infrastructure. So there's a lot of things that we do from an availability standpoint. From a security standpoint, we act as a natural defense mechanism. Because we're a distributed platform, we can naturally handle service attacks. So when there's a flood of requests coming in, those requests could hit our platform, which is now distributed across 120 plus thousand servers. Right, so it's a very different way to be able to absorb such a and those could be real URLs that they're hitting. They could be fake URLs, so like a 404 attack. They could be SIM card attacks. Right, there's a lot of different types of attacks that we absorb. And lastly, is from a real-time reporting standpoint. So when your content is offloaded through your Akamai, it's important to be able to get feedback in real time. So you can track usage, you can track calls made through the API. And we have ways to provide that data back in real time, to the gateway, or even to some other analytics environment where we're taking a look at this. So that's a brief high level in terms of how we work and how we fit into the API environment today. And I can go into some more specific examples. Actually, let me do that. So here's a very basic, very generic example of just delivering content from an API request through Akamai. So let's say from a high level, an end user makes a request for some sort of very generic example. That request goes to the Akamai server, and the Akamai server doesn't have the response to that loaded. We'll always go back to the source location. So we'll have information about where the source is and pull that information, the response, from the origin. So in this particular case, we can assume that it's a cacheable response. Maybe it's an image, maybe it's an HTML file or XML file. It really could be anything. Well, we can essentially pull that content down and then deliver it out to the end user. If it's cacheable, we can cache it and store it for other end users as they come in and ask questions. If it's not cacheable, we can accelerate it through the internet, leveraging all those techniques that I described earlier that optimize TCP and optimize the route through the internet. These were just some examples random examples that I threw together. So I made up a website called cooldudejobs.com. And the first URL shows, say, an example of, hey, I want to pull information from my API for the zip code 94002. Maybe that's a response for a list of jobs. Maybe it's a response for companies, whatever the case will be. We can have rules on our platform that says, hash this for a day period of time, and come back to us after a day and see if that content's been refreshed. And all of our servers will do that as requests come in from end users. What we could also do is we can also leverage this type of technique with authentication. So here I'm using an example where there's a query string parameter for authentication hashtag. Of course, this could also be embedded in a cookie or whatnot, but for simplicity, for ease of the slide, I use a query string. But what we can do here is we could essentially utilize on a hash key this full URL. So the authentication element as well as the zip code, which maybe the result is unique to that end user based on their authentication.
Hey, Gary, can I just interrupt you for 1 sec? Did you mean to switch your slides? You still got your opening slide? Did you have a diagram you were talking to?
Oh, okay. Are you not able to see it?
No.
We can see it now.
Okay, there you go.
It might be when you full screen it, it doesn't continue to refresh.
Oh, okay, got it. So let me, well, that's really unfortunate.
Sorry about that.
No problem at all. So, can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So these are just some examples of some URLs that I'm talking about. So basically, I kind of went through the first one already. So this is a response or a request for some sort of zip code. There's this authentication one as well, and we can actually modify our hash key where we can incorporate the authentication tag hash key, or we can even exclude it. And this allows us to interact with authentication servers on every request, or allows us to essentially say, hey, we can hash this for an hour period of time, a whole day or whatnot. It allows us to help uphold a certain business. That's a very high level for what we do, and I'm kind of curious to hear what types of questions are being formulated out there that we can answer. Like how you can leverage some of these different APIs.
We'll let Francois kind of do his little introduction, and then we'll answer Stefan Dank his question. It's pretty specific, and it's a good one. And it looks like he's all the way from Switzerland. So stay tuned, Stefan. We'll get your question answered.
Sure, guys. How do you pass the scope to me there, Steven?
Yeah, you're the main.
Oh, am I? Okay,
yes.
Cool. So from my perspective, Layer 7 obviously best known for API management. We provide infrastructure, and we're built from the ground up to scale, to accommodate large volumes and things like that. But we're coming across situations right now, running into situations where either people have, as part of their API, some content that has some very large payloads associated with them, and they're used to delivering that content already through other channels like web and things like that through Akamai, right? A lot of people have existing Akamai relationships, and they'd like our API management infrastructure to integrate with Akamai. So we see a lot of that, and that's why we're rolling out this new integration with Akamai. The other thing is that although we'll scale to a certain degree, and you can set up Layer 7 gateways, across regions, things like that. Like Gary was explaining his introduction, obviously, we don't have the same network, the same scale that Akamai has, right? If you can leverage that network, it allows your API to reduce latency. It allows your API initiative to reach an audience that is going to be much more performant, and that's why the integration between Akamai and Layer 7 makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of details, obviously, in this integration are really important to figure out, so that from an application perspective, an application calling this API, you're still going to have access to the resource in a timely manner. And on the API provider side, you want to make sure that you're not, that you're still having control over who has access to these resources. So people use our API management infrastructure in such a way that they want the authentication of the identities related to the API consumption to be close to their identity infrastructure. And Layer 7 continues to provide that integration, but delegate that entitlement verification all the way to the Akamai network. So that's the kind of integration that we're doing. And the other challenge and the other thing that we're working on at the moment is to be able to propagate from the Akamai network consumption information that ends up in our analytics. Because when you use API management infrastructure from Layer 7, you want to be able to go back in history see how much specific applications consume APIs, that has very important consequences for example, for billing, invoicing, as well as for scaling up your API. You know, being able to support a growing demand for the API, and just in general being able to see how your API is doing. So maybe I'll just jump right into Stefan Denk's question here. So for those who can't see this, Stefan is asking, with Akamai being great at buffering content, how will this be extended with Layer 7? Will we get transactional data buffered by Akamai Layer 7?
The next bit is the second question, kind of a follow-up.
Okay, yeah. So I'll just start with that. Maybe Gary, you can comment as well afterwards. But so yeah, so from my perspective, yeah. So with Layer 7, if you're familiar with Layer 7, you can do some local caching. So now, if you connect that to the Akamai network, obviously Akamai is going to do caching as well, closer to the application. So effectively, Akamai is going to come back to the origin, and in their terminology, the origin in that case is the API infrastructure. Typically, would be at the edge of your API zone, if you want. And there can still be some caching there for performance reason, because we might get requests from Akamai from lots of different directions, but the Akamai network is going to do its own caching of these resources closer to the application in the Akamai network. And Akamai allows us to instruct Akamai on certain parameters around this caching. For example, you know, like for example, how long should a specific request be cached for, right? That's very important if you have dynamic content. And in our policy language, when you set up these responses coming from the Akamai network, you have full control of that. That's the good news. So you still have a very granular control over what needs to be cached from the Akamai network, for how long, and the same goes from all the entitlement requests. So I'm just going to, while I'm at it, take a crack at the second question from Stefan. A lot of e-commerce stores already run on Akamai. Is there a pilot on using Akamai to provide price quotation calls from a cache rather than always carrying the system of record? So in this case, you know, we're talking about API management, right? And an e-commerce platform obviously may involve some APIs under the hood. Is there a pilot on using Akamai to provide price quotation calls from a cache? I guess that's just one example where yes, you could have some caching involved there. Okay, and I'm just noticing that Stefan has a third question.
Yeah. So actually,
yeah, go ahead, Gary.
I think everything you said, you know, from the first question is spot on. It's, you know, from a buffering content, I'm interpreting buffering content as caching content. So hopefully, Stefan, that is, you know, what you meant. But look, you can view Akamai as very complementary to the Layer 7 sort of, you know, offering in the data center. So, you know, the caching elements that you have in place there and how you interact with Layer 7 there, you know, those same types of rules, and you know, can be set up on the Akamai side as well. So you can look at it as an extension of that platform, you know, as a scale, you know, the overall infrastructure environment.
He does mean caching by buffering.
Okay. Yeah. Now, to the second question, you know, that's a great use case. I would you know, couple it, you know, just like how we could cache the results of a search. So search results could be cached for a certain period of time, same way that like a pricing for a commerce site could be cached for a certain period of time. There's a certain period of time where it's okay to show that pricing. It does depend on the use case. It depends on the actual site itself. If we're talking about a very, you know, actively dynamic, you know, auction site like an eBay, right? Maybe you don't want to cache it as long, but if you're looking at, you know, something that's pretty static, you know, static store in terms of, you know, the pricing, maybe it's okay to, you know, cache it for a day and check back, you know, every so often to make sure inventory is still valid and that, you know, you can still sell it. So all of that is configurable on our platform, and in terms of how long we can store stuff in our caches for. It could be anywhere from 0 seconds, meaning we can store it in cache, but check back with the infrastructure every single time a request is made from an end user to make sure it's fresh, or to 365 days. You know, it's basically like, don't ever check back with me. It's always going to be this result. So I think it's a good case, and it's certainly something that you know, we can support today.
Yeah. Cyrus was asking a bit of about a use case, which I think you guys had touched up on already. But if you'd like to be more specific on that, Cyrus is asking about a use case involving Layer7 and Akamai.
Okay, so the question is about populating content worldwide. So the way content is populated on our system, sorry? Right. So
sorry, I think there's a little bit of confusion. We haven't got to Stefan's third question, which is what Gary was just going to address, and then we can answer Cyrus's use case question. Okay?
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So Cyrus' question: can you talk about a use case involving Layer7 and Akamai? Well, I think there are some high-level ones. I don't think we can mention any of the company names, though.
Yeah, without mentioning specific companies, one specifically is for a very, very large transactional volume site, business, whereby they have peaks based on different events or occurrences in the world. Sort of like news events, if you will, if I can abstract it to that level. So what they're looking for is a combination of the API management capabilities, the depths and integration capabilities that Layer7 provides them, right, at the origin, and having that be a management change policies and behaviors in the Akamai network, right, by controlling that one gateway, right, and then using Akamai to provide 80 to 90% of the transactional offload, where although these APIs are providing very time-sensitive information, sort of news event information that's changing rapidly, there is still some period of time whereby you can cache that content. Even if it's 1 minute for certain, high-value customers, maybe 20 minutes for other, lower value or people who aren't paying for the API usage rate, they can achieve a tremendous amount of origin offload, handle tremendous peaks and spikes in the transactional sort of flow, while maintaining different SLAs to their end users, their end customers, right? Without having to maintain origin levels at the volume to handle peaks in traffic, right? And that's just one situation where the volume of that particular use case is so great that it needs the size of Akamai in order to handle that sort of traffic.
Okay,
yeah.
great.
So can I touch on that as well, Steven? So
Sure.
yeah, one specific use case that has come up is where a national broadcaster has an API which provides election results, right? So there's a national or regional election coming up, and while the votes are being counted and things like that, you've got lots of different applications out there that are giving you some results, right? Those are meant to be real-time results, but of course, if you can cache those even for, let's say, 10 seconds, like Gary was saying, I mean, that you're offloading a lot of stress on the origin infrastructure, and because these events are very set in time, right? The next morning, the election results are all well known. This API doesn't get the same amount of traffic anymore. Or next week, it's over. Nobody's talking about it anymore. So you've got these events in time in which you need to be able to scale to a very large scale, and you only need that for a very temporary amount of time. It makes a lot of sense to to use Akamai. It's very analogous to using something like a public cloud to scale up for a very short amount of time. So election results is a use case. Extreme weather event is another example that we've encountered on the field, where people expect for these extreme weather events to have a very high stress on the infrastructure. So that kind of thing is a specific example, you know, to address Cyrus' question there.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure that we got back to Stefan's kind of third question about refresh times. Did Gary, could you maybe have a crack at Akamai? The question that Akamai tends to take some hours to populate new content worldwide. How about transactional data served out of Layer 7? How long will updates take for global reach?
Sure. So from a high level, the way content is populated on our servers, it's a pull-based algorithm. So as requests come in from end users, the Akamai servers will, you know, check to see if they have it locally first. If they don't, it actually goes through several layers. So we'll check with other servers, you know, in that same data center first to see if they have the content. If not, we even check with an intermediary layer of Akamai servers to see if they have the content. If they don't, then we can check back with the origin or the gateway directly. From there, it's passed along the way. That's how, so content's not pushed out to us, it's pulled out, and it does depend on the popularity of the content in terms of how many servers it's going to be in. But even with some of the you know, the most popular, say, social networking sites that say have like thousands, millions of different images that may only be seen, you know, a couple of times. You know, even for those types of sites, we're able to see very high cache hit rates because of our algorithms in terms of, you know, directing users to servers that likely will have the content, as well as the intermediate sort of elements that we want to ensure that we find the content within our platform. So we're able to find out pretty fast. In general, we can do it for very large volume libraries.
The freshness of your cache content depends upon the rules that you specify. Gary mentioned earlier that you can do a 0-second cache TTL, which means always serve it from cache if it's on disk there, and then immediately go back forward to the origin to do a asynchronous refresh. So you can maximize the content being current and fresh, but yet not force the end user to make a synchronous request back to the origin, right? So the freshness of your content depends on the policy that you set. And the nice thing about having using a gateway architecture is that you can choose dynamically ramp up that caching policy based on things like origin demand or capacity, right? You say when demand is at or below our capacity threshold, move the policy toward maximum freshness of content, right? If you are reaching a sort of saturation point of your origin, you can turn up that policy to say, provide me more offload, more defense, increase TTL to maybe 5 minutes, and then make sure that you're not overloading the dynamic capacity as your origin, right? Once that peak goes back down, you can move the policy back to the direction, right? So it depends on what your business requirements are.
And then Stefan also had a question around transactional data, and I'm intending that to mean you know, sort of dynamic, where there's a one-to-one interaction where users make a request, but there's really no ability for Akamai to cache that result because it's essentially unique in nature, and the next time it's requested, the result is going to be different. So, you know, in those cases, we can leverage the 0-second TTL rule where we check back with the origin to see if it's been updated, as Brian mentioned. Or we can just set the Akamai servers to say, never ever cache this result, only enable your dynamic acceleration rules to move this data through the internet, you know, faster than, say, the default internet route would, even the default internet rules would, essentially. So we enable those as well. That's actually very popular services from an Akamai standpoint. Basically services that optimize routes to the internet, optimize TCP connections, you know, as well. So that's how we handle that type of transactional type of data.
Great. Got a couple of questions around authentication that you may have sort of touched on, but I just want to make sure that we get them in before the end because we're kind of winding down towards the end of the discussion. So, can I offload API resources to Akamai even if they require user authentication?
Yes. So.
Okay.
So, actually, do you want to just take that? Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the primary advantages to this integration we're talking about. Is that the diagram we showed earlier sort of indicated that all requests and authorization has to go back to the origin. The integration that we have separates out those two questions. So first of all, do you, the API client, have access to this API, or the end user? And the second question is, is this content in cache and is it available to be served in cache, right? So when the request first comes to the Akamai Edge server, we say, we look at a few different levels of analysis. The first is there an authorization token, right? First of all, does this API require authorization? Yes. If so, is there a token? If there's no token, you can perform any number of functions. You can deny it. You can run a 401 response. You can redirect it to an authorization, login service. If it has that authorization token, the next question is, have I seen this authorization token and or key combination in the past, right? If I have not, then the Akamai Edge server will, sort of drop into a sub-process, make a request back to the Layer 7 gateway, an accelerated request back to the Layer 7 gateway, and pass those credentials back along with whatever API target is being asked for, right? The Layer 7 gateway will perform a variety of sort of authentication, authorization, evaluations, and return back a response, a positive, negative response, and potentially return back additional policy information or identity information back to the Akamai Edge server. Right? At that point in time, if it gets an affirmative response, it'll say, great, you have access to this API resource. And the next question is it in cache? Yes, it's in cache. It's a news article, a weather article, a catalog update, whatever it may be, right? It's in cache. We'll serve it to you directly, right? When that request comes back to the Akamai Edge server, the same evaluation happens. We say, oh, you have authorization, credentials. I've seen you before. The response back of your authorization is still valid, so I don't need to go forward anywhere. Yes, you can get to this content. The content's in cache. Give your response. The whole thing happens probably less than 20 milliseconds.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Francois, do you have any comments on that?
Well, yeah. So great thing about that, the way to integrate like that is that, let's say that you have a situation where you have a large payload. Akamai will come back to us to do the entitlement check, and we can say yes or no whether or not a resource should be allowed to a requester. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the resource still has to go from Layer 7 to the Akamai layer. Akamai can still have that resource cache, but come to us for the entitlement check. So typically, an application would get a token from us. Typically when we talk about API, we're talking about OAuth. There's an OAuth access token that an application has, and it uses that access token as part of the API request. So the first time that token is encountered by Akamai, they come to us. We say, yeah, that is our token. That is for that user, and that should be allowed. So you get the best of both worlds, and Akamai allows us to do the entitlement check on their behalf, not just for OAuth token, but for any kind of token, right? It could be like an HMAC signature as well in an HTTP header, and that would work as well. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and there's a very good integration that is very efficient, is what I would say.
And so even if you're not doing caching, right? Even if it's a 100% dynamic transactional site, right? There's still value in offloading and moving that authorization question out to the edge, right? Good chance your authorization evaluation, that policy, that response is valid for a period of time. So if someone comes to the edge, you say, great, you're already validated, you have access to this resource, and go forward, and Akamai will accelerate that transaction back to the origin, back to the Layer 7 gateway, right?
Right.
You have 5 cloud points of presence, right? We'll route it to the optimal endpoint, and then we'll go to the Layer 7 gateway at that particular cloud provider endpoint, right? Now, conversely, if that user comes back and you've denied them, you said, okay, your key is no longer valid, right? They'll be blocked right there at the edge. There'll be no impact to the origin resources whatsoever, right? If there's a denial of service attack or some malicious activity, or you shut down a key that still has traffic coming to it, right? That will never impact your origin or your API management infrastructure.
Yeah, one last point on that, which I think is very interesting about the way that we integrate for this access control for APIs, is that the same way that we can instruct Akamai when we return a resource on how long a resource should be cached through these headers and things like that, we can do the same thing for the entitlement request itself. So effectively, you can control how long you want Akamai to remember not only the content of a resource, but an entitlement check. So if I say that Steven has access to a specific resource based on a token that's provided to me, I can tell Akamai, you don't need to ask me again for the next, I don't know, let's say X minutes. You know, if it's safe to remember that this was allowed given that token for that specific resource request. And that caching period can be different than the caching period for the content of the resource itself. So it's very flexible.
Great. Okay, I'm just going to ask anybody if you have any last questions or thoughts, just to chat them in or send through Twitter with the Layer7 Live hashtag. And we'll wrap up with one kind of final thought on security. So we've got a question around, can Akamai do anything specific for APIs from a security standpoint? And that's probably going to involve Layer7 obviously as well. But can Akamai do anything specific for APIs from a security standpoint? And we'll finish up on that note.
Yeah, so I mean, security is definitely an interesting beast. So like I said earlier, I mean, there's a natural defense mechanism that was applied in general. In addition, Akamai, we also provide a distributed web application firewall where we may be able to add rules, into that service to basically look at the requests coming in and based on certain patterns be able to react to them, either alert you to certain types of requests that are coming in, or be able to block those requests directly on our edge server. So it's a very powerful way to extend and protect your infrastructure, and that's the main specific element that comes to mind outside of the generic elements that we've talked about.
Obviously, DDoS protection, right? Malicious or expired users, right, are not going to come back to your origin infrastructure. Right? APIs have the same vulnerability to attack, or similar as a traditional website, interface. So that's where the HTTP level, layer 7 in generic sense, web application firewall comes into play, right? Looking at the content, looking for threats and actual content level attacks, and denying those at the edge, right? The big thing is you want to come back to your centralized environment and have to deal with them there. You want to distribute that out to the endpoint, and keep that from ever affecting any other user experiences. The full set of Akamai security strengths we provide across all types of content also apply to APIs.
Okay. Francois, any final thoughts?
Yeah, so just from its scale, right? I'll just echo what Akamai was saying there. Protecting against a denial of service attack, just from its scale. Obviously you would get a stronger protection from something like having Akamai in front of your API management infrastructure. So I think from a security perspective, you can benefit from that.
Okay. Great. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in. We'll want to say thank you to Stefan and Cyrus and others who have asked questions. Stefan and Cyrus, to send in your address, your mailing address to techtalk@layer7.com and a shirt size, and we'll get you a shirt for sure. Gary, we're going to get you a shirt too. Francois, you probably have one.
No!
I'm surprised you're not even wearing yours. We didn't give you one?
I better get a shirt.
Okay, you can get a shirt. And Brian, we can get you one as well. So make sure you send us your size and address where you want us to send them. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Gary, Francois, right from the floor, and Brian. Thanks, guys. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
And so one last thing, our next Tech Talk will probably be towards the end of September. Not sure exactly the topic of the guests, but make sure you check back our Twitter feed, all our social media networks, Facebook, LinkedIn, the website, and probably towards the end of September after everybody gets back from holidays, kids are back in school, people can focus on APIs again. We'll do another one towards the end of September. So thanks, everybody. We appreciate it. Thanks, Francois, Brian, and Gary. We really appreciate it. Jose, great job.
See you
next time.
Thanks, Brian, Gary.
See ya. Thank you.
Yeah.